Hello. I would like to thank the National Council for Science and the Environment and Project Drawdown for the kind invitation. My name is Martin Stuchtey. I'm a professor for resource strategies and management at the University of Innsbruck, and I'm a founder of SYSTEMIQ. I quite like the blend of science and the vision that the Project Drawdown gives us, and I think it's the kind of blend that is needed as we are reaching an inflection point. After 2020, we all see it, we all know it, we all understand it, that we have reached an inflection point and that our future cannot be, will not be the linear extrapolation of what we have done in past decades. There are many different interpretations of what that future that we need could actually look like. There are competing narratives. One narrative is fairly indefensible. It's that climate change, it's that social division are just very marginal new constraints that can be easily managed. That is a very tough proposition and almost indefensible. There is a second proposition that technology will fix it, that through our mastery of organic complexes, of electrons, of photons, of ions, we will get those new systems in place that will allow us to get to green energy, that will get us to a circular model of production and consumption. And so we should just trust in the invisible hand of technology. That again is a narrative that we have been working with for quite some time, and it didn't get us there. There's a third narrative out there that yes, we need to change, but we need to be very cautious because it can't bite into our prosperity. There's only so much climate mitigation, and there's only so much social equilibration that we can afford, and we can't move too fast. And that, by the way, is very much a mainstream proposition. And there's a false paradigm, a false narrative that is out there. Essentially, it says that we have entered an age of a great divergence. All the way until the mid-80s, 90s, we've been living in a world where all our economic lead indicators have been emerging in sync. And since then, we have seen a divergence. Labor productivity, GDP, income, employment, but also any reasonable measure of societal progress have been diverging. And through that, we have entered a new world. We've entered a world in which we are growing ourselves poor. Two of those dynamic gaps that this divergence creates are in fact quite palpable. The one is the division, the gap between productivity growth and median family income. That's the justice gap. And the other one is between GDP growth and any decent, reasonable measure of society's progress. That is our environmental, our natural capital gap. And the task now is, that's the new narrative, that we need to and that we can close off these gaps at the same time, that we can get ecologically, socially, and environmentally our house in order. That's a tremendous ambition. And that's very much the ambition that stands, as we all know, behind the SDGs. And it is so tremendous because it's uncharted territory, essentially. We haven't been there. Everyone on Earth deserves to have a good life. Not to wish everyone that would be cynical at best. So we want to live a life that's to the right-hand side of an HDI of 0.8. The problem is, as we are growing there, as we are getting there, our demand on natural resources is increasing, and we are moving into a corridor, into a space that sits beyond the regenerative capacity of our planet. So on this chart, there's only one area in which we want to live, to the right-hand side of 0.8 HDI, and where we can live which is below the 1.8 hectares of ecological footprint. And it's on the top, on the bottom right-hand side. And that's, as you can see, an empty space. It's uncharted territory. We don't know how to get there. In that context, there's an experiment which is hugely exciting. That's a European Green Deal. It's a learning case for all of us well beyond Europe. Essentially what it does, it introduces a new political paradigm. In the past, we have defined where we want to go and grow economically, and then we said, what does that do to our social systems? And then we asked, what does it do to our ecological and earth systems? And this time it's the other way around. We want to be climate neutral in 2050, and everything else is subjugated to that objective, and it's taken as the driver for our economic and innovation strategy, and it's taken as the trigger for our socially just transition. That's quite a change. It's not a nuance, it's quite a change. And in order to do that, you need to have a very comprehensive political program. You need to have a climate law that actually tells you that you have to get to climate neutrality. Then you need to have an energy transition, an infrastructure transition, an industry transition, a food transition. You need to have a plan of how to deal with pollution and with biodiversity. You need to have an idea what your financial sector actually has to do. You need to reinvigorate your research sector. And all of that needs to be embedded into a program of a just transition. Quite a daunting, quite a comprehensive reset of the European political agenda. We've been asked, should this happen? And we quite like the vision. We've also been asked, will this happen? And we said, it can only happen if we change a couple of systemic enablers that underlie today's systems. And we need to change 10 things, and changing them is the new compass. So here are 10 principles that you have to address to make sure that there is no competition and no antagonism between our social, our ecological, and our environment and our economic agenda. You have to redefine prosperity. You have to start from the idea of how prosperity and wealth is actually distributed in order to be ready for that transition. You have to redefine natural resources and to be clear about the role that they play in wealth creation. You have to redefine progress altogether, which needs to start from the idea of human needs, and which doesn't have to start with the idea of rolling our industrial sectors forward. You have to redefine the way we measure wealth and move away from GDP to alternative measures of well-being. You will have to redefine competitiveness, which is not that of products, but which is that of digitized, smart systems. You will have to redefine how incentives need to be designed in such a way that companies actually have an interest to design and market the products and the services. They need to feel like the through cycle owners of the product. You need to redefine consumption and take it away from a concept of one-off consumption to a concept of use. You need to redefine the role of finance as a massive enabler and agent of this huge societal transition. You need to redefine governance in a way that it makes participation much easier. Many of you have taken note of all those citizen conventions that are now starting to take root. And you need to redefine leadership in such a way that it reflects our societal and intergenerational contract much better. That's a top-down compass that we need. That is a set of principles that need to guide us. The good thing is they are describable and they're all at our fingertips in terms of policy making. None of them are in the realm of impossibility. That's one thing we have to do, top down. And then bottom up, we have to understand what does that future economic system actually have to look like that will deliver all these good social, ecological, environmental, and economic outcomes. And that needs to start with our human needs. We want to be fed, we want to be moved, we want to be housed, and we want to see our demand for daily functional needs being fulfilled. And in order to do that, we need a mobility system, we need a nutrition system, we need a built environment or a housing system, and we need a consumer goods system. That is not good enough. We need 4 additional systems: an energy system, a circular material system, a nature-based system, nature, and we need to have an information and data system that is supporting that. These are the cornerstones of the next economy that we are building. These are 8 cornerstones, and around them we will see the champions, the hotspots, the growth icons of that new economy that we are building. It's 50 of them. It might be more, it might be less. Here are the 50 new champions that you as an investor, that you as a policymaker, that you as an educator should be geared at, turned to, interested in, that we need to build in order to get to that next economy. Now, it was 5 years ago that we started a new company. It's not really a company, it's an experiment. It's the experiment of whether you can build a firm that actually thrives on only 2 objectives, which is to accelerate the attainment of the Paris Climate Agreement and of the SDGs. And what we do at SYSTEMIQ is essentially we are trying to accelerate the creation of markets in those support systems that we need for the next economy. The energy system, the circular material systems, land use and natural systems, and information and processing systems. And every time we do that by triggering both demand and supply. We do that for plastic, we do that for ecosystem services, we do that for responsible fuels, but we also do it for risks, and that's the area where we need data. So every time we are trying to help to bring those new markets to place. Let me spend less than a minute on each of them to explain what I mean. Companies are starting to understand that they woke up in a new context under the Paris Climate Agreement, under the European Green Deal. They have to have a strategy of how to decarbonize. That's not an easy sport at all. Nothing they would have ever done with the rigor that is now required. That requires them to do, on the one hand, set up a mitigation portfolio, but on the other hand, also a negative emission scenario or portfolio that helps them to get there. This is what Vertree does, one of the companies that we started together with our JV partner, a major London-based trading house, which is making sure that companies have the ability to set up a long-term 2050 decarbonization portfolio that mixes mitigation opportunity with compensation opportunity in such a way that they safely land in a climate neutral scenario. So we are helping to build the supply and the demand for future compensation services, largely sourced from rainforests, largely sourced from the tropical belt. The second example is in the area of energy. We, as quickly as possible, have to get to a world where we are using renewable energy and particularly power. On the way there, we have to minimize the effects that fossil fuels actually bring with them. Many would not know that natural gas in that context is a challenge because there is a lot of methane leakage at the borehole. Methane is a very potent climate agent. It's about 84 times more effective than CO2. And that makes natural gas a very powerful, in fact, an even more harmful climate emittent. For that reason, we have created Capterio, which is a company that tries to help oil and gas producers to manage their methane leakage at borehole and during the production process. And we have created SYSTEMIQ, which is a methane intelligence service and certification services that helps companies to demonstrate that they are using responsible natural gas in the first place, and which helps them to bring that to market at a premium. Demand and supply need to be developed at speed at the same time. Let's turn to plastic. Here's the STOP program. We all know that plastic in the environment is an increasingly acute problem. It's particularly hitting the global south, countries like Indonesia. It's in Indonesia and East Java that the STOP program very soon will be serving many million people in a couple of coastal towns, where they are organizing the entire recovery of the materials. It's being sorted, and then it's being fed in more than 19 material fractions to the recycling industry. So where there's a lot of demand for that, because companies increasingly have to live up to their recycled content commitments. So working on both sides, creating the supply of the material, but also helping companies to understand that they need to get recycled contents into their products, working on the demand. And the last example takes us to the world of data, to the world of information, which we need in order to create a market for environmental risk. Jupiter Intelligence is a company who we work with, which is making our exposure to the forces of climate change visible. And it's only then that we can ensure it. And only when we can ensure it, risk has a price. And moving towards climate-friendly practices has an economic reward. Again, and it's an attempt to accelerate the emergence of markets for the better use of resources and building the support systems that we need for our next economy. I could go on. Overall, we should be quite optimistic when we look at that, and we feel when we look at our data, this is an analysis from our paper, The Paris Effect. We feel quite encouraged with the thesis that it is about accelerating the emergence of the new markets. It's not about waiting for technology. 5 years ago, when we had the Paris Climate Agreement, at that time, only about a third of the solutions that we needed to get us to climate neutrality were available on a market level, and then at a niche market level. Now, 5 years later, the whole picture has changed. 2/3 of the solutions that we need to get us to climate neutrality are at market readiness, and a quarter, which is the power sector, has already entered the stage of a mass market. To us, it's absolutely possible and necessary that by 2030, more than 2/3 of all the solutions that we need for climate neutrality will actually be sitting in the mass market segment. For that, however, we don't need more and new technologies. Yes, we do, don't get me wrong. But what we really need is market acceleration, mechanisms, strategies to accelerate both the emergence of supply and demand. That's just what I talked about. Now, why do we think this could happen? Because this is the narrative that goes with the young, with the next generation. They understand that this is an inflection point. They understand that this is our single biggest challenge, but even more so, they understand this is our single biggest opportunity. It's an opportunity of a lifetime that the next generation, the young generation, feels very ready to embrace. Thank you.